Many of you will recognise this as the National Arboretum and the National Police Memorial here in Staffordshire, Staffordshire Police's ground, and I'm joined again by the Chief Constable of Staffordshire, Chris Noble. Chris, it's a moving place, isn't it?
It is, and we're very privileged to have the Arboretum, and then obviously within that the police space, which is obviously about reflecting, remembering, learning, and just taking time out sometimes to appreciate the significance of the sacrifice for so many colleagues who join policing, aware of the risks as we all are, but made the ultimate sacrifice. And I think both from a national memorial perspective, it's a very powerful space, and in lots of ways a very quiet space as well, just to reflect. And then for me, obviously there's some very personal connections nearby. Just behind you we have got the RUC GC memorial space, and then
so
just
the
across
Royal Ulster Constabulary, the forerunner of the police service of Northern Ireland, PSNI.
Absolutely, which probably more than almost any other police service has proportionately suffered a huge amount of trauma and loss over the years. And then, as you say, on the other side of the walkway, sort of back up the National Memorial space, we have the Police Service in Northern Ireland ground as well.
So let's just step this way. We're going to walk in the direction of the sun currently. It's quite warm here.
It is a complete contrast to whenever this space opened, whenever it was pouring rain.
It was absolutely a downpour. I think 2021 is, although that maybe that's not quite right, because that's middle of COVID, so perhaps that wasn't the date. As we head towards the first or the next element of what we're planning to visit, the Royal Ulster Constabulary memorial area. Let me just ask you, what led you to join the police in the first instance? You joined, I think, the Royal Ulster Constabulary.
Yeah, so I joined policing in September 1996. My sort of passion growing up, I'd always wanted to be a barrister, but realised I didn't win enough arguments to be a barrister. So that was something that didn't quite work out for me as I started to realise the significance and what it involved. So I had the example of my dad. My dad was a bank manager by day and then was in what was called the part-time reserve by night. And one of the earliest pictures of me as a child is in a ridiculous sort of pair of striped tartan pyjamas, but wearing his his RUC hat. So I think from an early age I was really aware of what my dad did and the sacrifice he made, that lots of his spare time wasn't given to his family, it was given to policing. So I had that sort of inherent and innate sense of sacrifice, bravery and courage and contribution to community.
So we've now reached the walkway that acknowledges the very significant sacrifices and contributions of those in the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Indeed, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, GC stands for George Cross Association. Very unusual for an organisation to be awarded a George Cross, an acknowledgement of the enormous sacrifices and contributions that were made by those in the Royal Ulster Constabulary. Let's walk up here, and as we go up here, there are stones set aside in this walkway that, well, tell us what they are.
Well, I think the memorial has names on it of individual officers who've lost their lives, but it also has memorial stones for stations who have suffered great loss within them, many of whom I've served in or were part of my subdivisional or other commands. So we've just walked past one called Mount Pottinger, where I was a sergeant, Musgrave Street to your left, where I was the district commander for a number of years and served a lot in Belfast. And whenever you walk into many of these stations, the ones that still exist, you'll see a memorial space with the names of officers who were lost. Very often, sometimes over 2 memorial stones. So a really poignant place that talks about sacrifice past and And of course Northern Ireland has a contentious history and policing is part of that, but I was very proud to join policing because of the difference you could make. And I think good policing, wherever it is in the world, has the ability not just to deliver policing services, but it can actually make societies better places as well. So that's one of the enduring things for me that I think policing in Northern Ireland should be most proud of, the changes and impact it had on society.
Let's just come to this memorial here in grateful memory of the men and women of the Royal Ulster Constabulary George Cross, who laid down their lives in the cause of peace in Northern Ireland 1922 to 2001. Some of the stones as we walk on our left and right are of places that I recognise simply because of the events. Omagh, for example,
yes.
the atrocity there. Others that Bangor, for example, which is a town in Northern Ireland that, to my knowledge, did not have any atrocity that came to my attention, at least, but still would have suffered during the Troubles. Tell us a little, or a lot indeed, about your service within the RUC, and then as the organisation transitioned to the PSNI, how that felt for somebody serving within the RUC.
Well, as I say, I joined in the mid-90s, and whilst it most undoubtedly was not the absolute heat or heart of the Troubles, one of the guys who I joined with in policing was killed very early on in my policing career simply because he was a police officer. So it was still a very challenging time. My kids didn't know what I did until they were about 10 years of age. I was a computer fixer for the first few years of their life until they realised they couldn't fix computers. And you couldn't really tell your neighbours what you did. You didn't put your clothes on the washing line. You checked under your car on a regular basis. But that was the norm. That was what came with the job. People joined knowing the context around that. So it was very much a vocation. It wasn't just a job. Definitely wasn't being done for job security or even life security. It was about the feeling that you can make a difference. And for me, obviously, that connection then with my dad and what he had contributed as well. So those early years in the 90s, early 2000s, still very significant challenges around security and safety, around public order and parading disputes. And it still was quite a militaristic organisation, primarily because of the need for that control and command and grip of challenges. But whenever, as part of the wider sort of peace process, the changes come into policing, it was an interesting space to be in. I'm probably the only serving police officer, at least in mainstream forces, who was part of what was called the Pat and Change team, and then changed into the change management team in '99 through to 2001. Where, as an organisation, I think policing really stepped up in terms of implementing the changes that, largely speaking, were driven by the sort of political cohort.
So the Patton inquiry, so-called after the individual who was leading that inquiry, Chris Patton,
yes,
a former Conservative politician who was given the task of determining, as part of the peace process, how the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and there's quite some meaning to sides of the community in the very name, the Royal Ulster Constabulary.
A lot of the recommendations that come out of the Independent Commission for Policing / Patton report, actually PSNI through Ronnie Flattingham were well ahead of around management, restructuring, budgets, the business of policing. There was nothing there really that people were arguing with, because we were well on with that already. I think the really challenging areas were those that tugged on the heartstrings. And
the
more
symbols,
than that,
the symbols,
the name, the uniform, as well as maybe an enduring sense that in some ways policing was being punished or was being harshly judged. But I do think as time has gone on, and I think it's really important that we do remember colleagues who've gone, and indeed their families who remain, and this is a space that we can do that. I do think there's a sense that actually policing is probably one of the positive success stories of the peace process, but not for any lack of pain that policing has suffered, but Policing nowadays is very much built around respect for human rights, policing with the community. And that new beginning that Patton talked about, I think has been very successful. We've seen real shifts in the composition and recruitment around policing as well. But I do think it's important to recognise that that was built on many, many decades of suffering and sacrifice. And we have to both be, I think, optimistic and progressive around what policing is, but never forget the past and the lessons of the past and the contributions of the past as well.
Let's, for the next handful of minutes, just reflect as we continue to film. We'll move towards the PSNI memorial and then on to other such memorials. But for the moment, Chris, I'm going to take the camera away from you and just pan over to some of those that lost their lives during that period.
So I think obviously we've started with the National Police Memorial, and then we've focused in a little bit on the particular context and sacrifice of the RUCGC. Obviously now the police service in Northern Ireland is a police service that polices in Northern Ireland, and even though it hasn't had that same level of thankfully terrorist murders and atrocities, we have had officers from the PSNI who've been murdered, lost their lives, maimed, their families torn apart, as well as their lives. But even just the day-to-day bravery of policing, I think in Northern Ireland still very much officers and staff just get on with it. And I'm not really sure there's still the same awareness across the rest of these islands in terms of the challenges that are faced every single day whenever officers go out, not just looking to serve their communities, but being really thoughtful about their own safety. So I think two very different organisations in many ways, and I think it is appropriate there's two different memorials, but at their core it's about courage, it's about standing in the gap between communities, and it's ensuring that policing is able to deliver a service that's impartial, no matter the context or the politics or the challenges. So I've been very proud to be a member of both these organisations, because fundamentally it's about being proud of policing and the vocation that we all sign up for and join. So very special places, and a lot more commonalities and similarities than there are differences, I think. So I think this is the last part of the Arboretum we're going to get time in today, which is a really special place to policing. I suppose I've had the privilege not just of joining the Royal Ulster Constabulary and then serving in the police service in Northern Ireland, but also joining Humberside Police and Staffordshire Police. And they're just a couple of the police forces that are represented in what we call the Beat, which is an area where families, friends, officers, and indeed just members of the community can come and really tangibly recognise the sacrifice of police officers. So as you walk along the length of this, you'll see plaques for individual officers, but each with the crest and the badge of their individual force. So a really powerful place, and one for reflection. But it's also a place as well, and you can see the copse tree, and you can see the plinth that cops have also dedicated as well, which makes it really clear that actually reflection has got to be a positive act. It's not just about looking back, it's about how can we continue to support police officers, and actually on many occasions their families whenever they're taken far too soon. So I'm a trustee of the COPS charity, proud to be so as a representative of chief constables across the country, and they, and indeed many other charities, do more than just reflect. They have a really clear current day commitment to working with police officers and their families whenever they fall into hard times, or indeed tragically taken, including on occasions in the line of duty. So a very important space for policing, and I would commend it to anyone to come and spend some time here and reflect on the past, but don't miss out the opportunity to make a commitment for the future and the present.